I'm just going to be sure to get confirmation here that we are going live. And see. And it will flash up on my, okay, and it is done. It takes about 30 seconds, usually about 30, 45 seconds up to a minute for it to do it. So, wow, we got 28 subscribers already since I put out the announcement last night, the press release. So that's pretty good. All right, so at this time, Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you. I will mute everyone here momentarily, so that way people keep text messaging me. No, Mike, I'm not going to rub my belly and pants. So now you may laugh hysterically in the background while I'm doing this. Okay, there we go. So you may go ahead, Mike, and start up, and I'll mute everyone's audio except yours. And I'm now going to unmute you. And and there we go. And you should be able to now unmute yourself and go.
All right. Well, good morning, folks, and thanks for having me. And I can't figure out how to get that off there, so I won't worry about it. My name is Mike Lunsford, and I'm going to talk to you about ham radio with a little different flavor. And you'll understand that in just a minute when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it. But let me explain my background a little bit. I'm retired. I'm retired battalion chief. I was the chief of special operations for Polk County Fire Rescue for 40 years. And in that capacity, I was the chief of everything that no one else wanted to do, which included, I was the liaison with our communications division in order to work with our radio system and our radio installs and et cetera, et cetera. So I had to have a basic knowledge there. Same with the Highway Patrol. I worked with the Highway Patrol for 35 years, retired a major in the auxiliary. And when we went to the P25 system, I was the guy who had to teach everybody how to use the new radios. And so this is going to be a ham radio with a little different flavor, and you'll understand it in just a minute. It's going to revolve around digital mobile radio. We're going to do some quick comparisons. DMR, we're going to talk specifically about DMR in just a few minutes, but I want to talk just a minute about DMR on the precept because there are some issues with DMR. It operates on 3 distinct modes. Type 1 is basically in Europe. We have some issues with that in the Orlando area during the Disney heyday when it's not closed all the time. Because people bring their FRS radios over here, which are actually tier 1 or type 1 DMR radios, and try to use them, and they're actually on ham bands. You can't access any of that type of radio in the United States, but they are brought here in people's suitcases on a regular basis to the theme parks. Type 2 is the most common for business, public safety, and ham radio, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get down the road. Because I think you'll be surprised about a few things in the tier 2. And then, of course, tier 3. I'm going to ask a question, and I don't want anybody to answer it because I'll answer in just a minute because it'll shock you. Other than two-way conventional modes, do you know who holds the most licensed formats in the West Central Florida area? P25, NextDen or IDS, DMR, or EDAC, pro-choice, or trumped. Now remember, P25 is your public safety format, so there's a huge number there. Here's the surprise. In the West Central Florida area, there are 4,328 commercial frequencies on DMR. There are 922 on NextDen, and there are on the P25, there are 2,042. So there are twice as many DMR frequencies licensed commercially in the West Central Florida area than any other format. And the reason for that is going to translate into why it's so popular in certain areas in ham radio.
Cost.
Hello? Oh, sterile. All right, tier 3 is a similar format. It's actually trunked DMR, and I'm going to show you a couple of things. First of all, let me just screen up here. Yes, all those are my portables, and I'm going to grab a couple of them right now. A lot of people ask me about monitoring DMR because DMR is a difficult format to monitor. You can use the Uniden SDS 100 or 200 to monitor DMR fairly easily. It does it automatically by zip code. All you have to do is tell it to listen to ham radio, and it will do tier 3, tier 2 trunking. The other is the Unication G5, not the G4. The G5 is a dual mode radio. Both of these are very expensive to monitor with. They're about $600 plus a piece, but you can monitor DMR. Why would you want to do that? You can monitor all the talk groups that you want to listen to instead of having to monitor 1 or 2 at a time. What is DMR? And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into DMR. Well, DMR actually started in Europe. Whenever the transition and the popularity became after the 9/11 incident, one of the big problems that we had in public safety everywhere, we've always had in public safety everywhere, is the fact that we have no common communication links. Everybody's on either low bands or on high bands or on UHF. Some of the more expensive systems have P25 and they're not interconnected. So one of the things that came out of the discussions after the 9/11 incident was to make compatibility an issue. Well, the first thing that came out was P25 compatibility. And it became an expensive proposition for the European countries simply because of topography and smaller countries and smaller areas without overlapping into other countries. So Motorola engineered DMR or digital mobile radio in order to take a existing system and split it into a dual system at the same time using the same frequency bands that they currently had. Sometimes it's erroneously referred to as poor man's trunking, and it facilitated the need in Europe, and then it transitioned into the United States to smaller communities that could not afford multi-site trunking systems to put their systems on the air for public safety and still have some reliability. And it also blocked out scanning for a while. So that's kind of how it emerged. And then Motorola engineers started building, who were hams, started building the first ham out of some surplus stuff, just exactly the same way it always happens. You know, that's how ham radio has existed throughout the years. If you look at the history, two things, and the previous presenter will tell you, will have just told you in his presentation, don't tell a ham that can't do anything. They will. They'll prove you wrong. They'll drag out their soldering irons and their technique, and they'll start building. The same thing is true with the digital side of it. Don't tell anybody that it can't, don't tell a ham that it can't be done, or they'll prove you wrong sooner or later. And that's where we are today in the digital realm of communications. Basically, how does it work? How does DMR work, or digital mobile radio work? Well, it's either on 70 centimeter, 2 meter, 900, and it's actually a unique thing. And this is what blows my little simple mind to pieces. It actually, when you key the microphone, if you ever have keyed a microphone on a DMR radio anywhere near a computer, you'll hear it. The radio turns itself off every 30 milliseconds, and then it turns itself back on. Now, it's not physically turning the radio on and off. It's just turning the transmitter on and off. So what that allows in that 30 milliseconds on the other side of that key is another transmission to occur side by side at exactly the same time. So there's two conversations paralleled on the same frequency at the same exact time. That's just an absolutely phenomenal thing to me. And I've actually monitored it to make sure that it works. And it's the coolest things to hear two conversations going on at one time on the same exact frequency. To put it in simple terms, this is sort of like living in a duplex. Now, unless it's allowed domestic argument, the general conversations that are going on one side of the duplex, you won't hear on the other side of the duplex, and they can be going on at the same exact time, but you're living underneath the same roof. That's exactly what's going on when you're talking about time division, multiple access groups using the same radio frequency. And I hope that made a little bit of sense to maybe clarify how some of that works. It's taken a 12.5, it's taken a narrow band, and it is splitting it down. It's splitting it down to 6.25. Now, Here's where you can get a little bit technical with folks if you use DMR, especially if you use hotspots or simplex. Your radio doesn't know unless the repeater tells it that you need to be on the 6.25, that it needs both time slots. Your radio doesn't know that. So if you try to monitor or measure it, you will see that if you're on a simplex frequency talking to your hotspot, you're not really splitting it down into the two time slots, because there's no need for it to. So your radio it'll still turn itself off every 30 milliseconds, but it's not coming back unless you have a dual mode hotspot on the split. If that makes sense. As I've heard people try to use simplex and use two different talk groups at the same time, and it won't work. That's basically the same thing with the 30 millisecond time slots. Wish I could get this out of the way. Maybe I can here. Now, there's several different ways that this information, once the radio keys up, and this is where we get into some discussion on whether it's really ham radio or not. This information then is sent to a repeater when you key this radio up, and it's sent to a C bridge, or it's sent to a network, or it's sent to a hotspot, one of the three. And then it's sent out to other modes via the internet, and then linked back to a repeater, hotspot, or another network. So we have to talk about the talk group. How did it get there? It got there on a talk group. So what is a talk group? There are several talk groups on the repeaters, and depending on the owner, how many talk groups he wants, or the group that is controlling it, they can control the number of talk groups per time slot, from just a few to a plethora of talk groups on that particular repeater. There's several repeaters in the south part of the state that have just accessibility on time slot 1 of just about everything on Brandmeister, for example. Well, that's about 1,800 to 2,000 talk groups. And then on time slot 2, they control it to the local stuff. It just depends on who is operating the C bridge, the network, as to how much stuff they allow. Even on your hotspot, you can limit yourself to the number of information talk groups that are going through your hotspot. Or if you don't, then you're going to have a crash, because when they all start talking at once, it goes crazy. What is a talk group? For you older guys who've been in ham radio, especially understanding the 2-meter side and the commercial side of it, we used to call these community repeaters in the business world. And what is a community repeater? Community repeater was a guy who put a repeater up. He ran a radio shop. He had a plumbing company, a taxi cab company, an air conditioning company, or whatever, all on that same community repeater. And each one of them had a different CTCSS tone, so that you could use that repeater, not have to listen to everybody talking. Only when your talk group came up, or your CTCSS tone came up on that community repeater, that's how you hear Joe's plumbing service was talking to Joe's plumbing service. Bad side about that, I did run one of those for several years, is you never put competing businesses on there. I learned the hard way, because they would listen to each other and take each other's customers. They're essentially sharing, they essentially share the same frequency for many, many users talk group in the talk group. Some are full-time and some are push to talk. Yeah, I hear this all the time when people call me and ask me about digital. They buy the digital radio, I help them get it programmed up. They say, I've been listening to my radio for hours and I have not heard a single thing. Well, there's two things happening there. Number one, is the talk group pulled full-time, or is it push to talk? If it's a full-time, we call these static, and they're on all the time. You can hear any conversation just like you can on a community, on your regular VHF, UHF repeaters. You can hear anyone talking at any time if they happen to be on there. The others are timed. So when you do the push to talk or the dynamics, that's the next screen, the dynamics, then it opens it up to a timer. And these talk groups may be timed for 15 minutes to 5 minutes, depends on what the provider wants the repeater to burn out at. To give you an example, Florida statewide. Florida statewide is a full-time talk group on most of the repeaters in Central Florida. So you don't have to key it up. And how you do that is to kerchunk it. And that is a cuss word amongst some hams because you're not supposed to kerchunk a repeater. However, that's the only way you can get the dynamic talk group to open, and it's going to open on the timer. If you don't carry on a conversation and say if it's timed at 5 minutes, it's going to turn itself off. Otherwise, it's going to stay linked through the entire group. 3100, for example. If you're on 3100 and if it was on all the time, you'd go crazy because people all over the world, depending on what time of the day, are on that group. So if I want to talk on 3100 and the peak times, I'll just open it up and I'll carry on a QSO. And then after 50 minutes, it shuts my local repeater off. So it doesn't have to stay keyed all the time, benefiting the repeater operator. So it doesn't burn his repeater up sitting there staying keyed all the time. And I'm going through some basics here just to get to where I want to get. And then I want to throw some things in there at you that maybe you didn't understand or didn't think about digital radio. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the slide that I just talked about. I'm looking at two screens here, so I'm seeing it before you do. Sorry about that. I'm not used to doing these Zoom things. Okay, well, if that's not enough, there's more to talk about digital radio. So let's talk about it. You have to talk about a code plug. And this is where people really start saying, I don't want anything to do with this thing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this photograph. Has nothing to do with ham radio. My son is Down syndrome. My son took this photograph in the Denali National Forest. I think that's a pretty cool photograph from a Down syndrome kid. He's the one who spotted the moose. What is a code plug? Well, a code plug is the information that goes into a digital radio. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's DMR or whether it's P25. There's still some semblance of a code plug. Some of the other modes do not have a particular code plug that you have to build into it. This is what makes DMR so difficult for ham radio operators, because it's exactly the opposite of what they're used to working with. DMR, the code plug, to make it simple, the code plug is actually the same frequency over and over and over and over again with a different talk group ID added to it in part of the matrix. So you can have the same frequency 36 times, but it'll have a different number. There are 6,000 talk groups in the United States. Now, they're not available to every repeater. Some of the more common used to be 310, 311, 312. Others like 3112 Florida statewide and 3124 Southeast region are fairly common and they're fairly active. But people ask all the time, I hear nothing on the radio. Well, if you look, there are 6,000 talk groups. There are talk groups of everything, of every interest that you could possibly want to get. There's motorcycle talk groups. There's a talk group now for morticians. There's a talk group about anything and everything that you can imagine. So this is where these people actually are. They're on these 6,000 talk groups. You couldn't monitor all that if you wanted to. So, which is kind of good and kind of bad. It doesn't give you the community effect, but it does give you the individual effect. I'm going to give you a statistic that's going on right now. Currently, there are, right this minute, there are 177 conversations going on one particular system right now, right this second. So when people say it's a dead mode, nobody's using it, it's very active. You just have to be able to find out where the activity is. It also allows you to build zones, scan lists, and the database. This is the other thing that is different from some of the other digital modes that create some problem with DMR. It's the only one that you have to download the CSV database for contacts. Now, what is that? That's your name and your ID number that comes up on the screen and tells you where you're at. Currently, there are 300,000 users for DMR that have an ID. That's just amazing to me. 300,000 people out there, and it grows every day exponentially. You can watch the screen of the number of people who are getting these things. Of course, they're buying them and they can't figure out how to use them, and they put them in the drawer, which is a sad thing. If you do not have an ID, you go to radioid.net and put in your call sign and your information, and they'll send you an ID. The other thing, real quick about, and it's not in the slide, but I wanted to add this about the code plug, especially if you're using a hotspot, whether you're using a let me get this over here so you make sure you can see it. Whether you're using like an open spot or a Zoom spot, or there's another hotspot sitting up here, which is a TGIF spot, different formats. If you're using the Brandmeister network and you wonder why you've not heard anything in the last several weeks, if you have not put your passcode in there, they are now requiring a passcode because people were stealing people's call signs. We have identity theft in ham radio now, and that's a crazy thing. So you have to have a passcode. 2 people here in Polk County had their call signs pirated, and they were being used in South Africa. So just to let you know, make sure you put that passcode in there as you set up your stuff. This is one way that assures amateurs are on the frequency. That was the original intent for the radio ID, and it also makes it shareable from radio to radio. I've built several code plugs for people over the years, a lot of code plugs for people over the years, and that's why I have so many different DMR radios up there, because I had to figure out how to use them in order to. People would buy a particular radio and they would ask me to help program it. You can build a code plug, and then you can take your call sign and ID out of it. You can share that code plug with someone else, and they just put their call sign and ID in it, and they have all the work that you've done, which is hours and hours and hours of building these code plugs. I have over 1,000 frequencies in my code plug, and I have 100,000 contacts in my code plug. So I travel a lot, so I have code plugs. It would be easier just to take my hotspot, but I like to use people's local repeaters. Yeah, we're approaching about 27 minutes, and we're almost into ID overload here. And I am a Andy Griffith fan, and that's Barney talking to Juanita at the diner, telling her he's an overload. So let's talk about a couple of other things. Let's talk about a few manufacturers to start with. But before I do that, let's talk about networks. Brandmeister, for example. This was several months ago. If you look over here where it says there are 9,608 hotspots, 3,221 repeaters on the air. This is as of this morning. There are 5,221 repeaters and 16,153 hotspots out there. Everybody's using these hotspots. They're just easy to use and easy to travel around with. Currently in transmit right now, there were 3,200 people in use there. 190,000 people are registered with DMR ID, but probably everybody in this room that's already has a DMR radio has at least 2, so they don't do the duplicates. What are the radios? The high end is the 65, the Motorola's or the Vertex, Hytera. Got one of each sitting up there. Very, very good radios, extremely good radios, but very difficult to get the software for. So what happened? The middle of the road came in. You have your Anytones, your Connect Systems, which is a commercial radio, the Alliance, the Alincos, The TYT is still the most popular radio out there, the UV380, 390. You can get them for $69 now, with which are the dual band. And the middle of the road, the MD380, which is no longer in production, but it's still readily available, is a single band. So you have to be very specific about which one you buy. In the northeast part of the country, there's a lot of DMR on VHF, but specifically UHF in this area. And these are available for less than $100 as well. The only downside to this thing, the MD380, is you can't put a CSV database over 10,000 contacts in it, which means it's people's name. The low end, middle of the road is Bofang, the RD5R and other versions, the 2101 and 3101. They're tier 2, but be real careful which one you buy. Some of the older ones are not going to work on people's repeaters. That's what I was talking about, a contact. If you've never seen that on a digital radio, if I was to call you on the DMR radio or start a QSO, that's what you would see. That's my radio ID at the top left-hand side. The talk group, time slot 1. And then that's my call sign. That's my name. And I get this every single day. I see your name's Joseph, but you identified your name as Mike. Yes. Since 1843, there's been a Joseph in every generation of my family, including my son and my dog. And so we all go by our middle names. So I have to answer that question just about every day. Do I have to ID like you do on 2 meter or 70 centimeter? Yes, per FCC rules, you still have to identify yourself as to who you are. Just because it's coming over the screen does not suffice. Now I'll talk about DMR, and then we'll get into some other specific digital modes. The hotspots, like I said before, they're a great tool. They're a great asset. Just be careful what you buy, that it's going to work. You can buy everything from a $79 one, which is built on a Pi-Star, which is very easy to build, all the way up to the Open Spot. This is the Open Spot 2. I love my Open Spot. I love my Pi-Star. I love my TGIF. TGIF has a touch screen, so I don't have to have a computer. So just research and do what you want to do. The reason I'm bringing up hotspots, as I stated earlier, in ham radio, don't tell a ham it can't be done, because the general conversation is the digital compatibility. And that's what I wanted to get into technically. The digital compatibility is where we're at today, because when Daryl asked me to consider doing this and get real techie, I started to do that and to get into the vocoders and the packets and the packet loss and how a packet's sent, et cetera, et cetera. Then I heard 2 guys on the radio that had been hams for a while. And they were still making the same statement that I've heard over and over and over. And the question is, who will win out and be the best digital format? Well, the answer is no one. If you go back to why I put that screen up at the very beginning, in the West Central Florida region, who has the most licenses in the commercial mode? They're the same way. This is never going to win out to whoever has the best one. Whatever that region happens to adapt to and use will be the winner for that region, but there will never be a national winner in the digital modes. So the other question that always comes up is, well, when they can make one, I'll be able to use, I'll select that one. Well, that day's here. There are hotspots now that are being developed. A couple of them that I can't tell you who are developing yet, but the newest one that I know about is actually pretty cool, because it doesn't require you to flip switches and on the screen to tell you which mode to. It automatically identifies the mode based on the vocoder and sends that digital signal to the other mode. And I think that's pretty cool. So don't tell a ham that you can't do it, because it can be done. We're the only ones that figured out how to do this on an economic basis. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Basically, what is a vocoder? All of these things use vocoders. Vocoders have been around since the 1920s. It's basically voice compression. You got to compress the voice down into a smaller time frame to make it work. We're doing it digitally, turning it into I's or ones and zeros, and then turning it back on the other end. But that is what a vocoder is. It's a voice compression. It's been used in every sort of media. It's used on television. It's used in radio. Now it's used in two-way radio and ham radio. Originally, the standard was by P25, and it was slow by today's standard. Originally, it's 3,600 bits, and now they're up into like 1.2 kilobytes per second in some of the new TDMA2 and some of the other modes that are coming out for digital to radio, and especially in the commercial world. Like I said, its original standard was in P25, but it was not TDMA 1 or 2. All right, comparison. D-Star. D-Star is an ICOM or Kenwood authorized product. Requires a specific radio from the manufacturer. It is true ham. It is one of the only two true ham digital modes out there. There are no commercial variants. The pros, it's very reliable, extremely reliable, clear as a bell. It is currently the only mode of digital radio that you can directly contact another ham radio with a digital D-Star radio, ham to ham on multiple repeaters and carry on a QSO. Cons, cost variables due to limited manufacturers. The more people who are making stuff, obviously supply and demand, it goes down. D-Star is prevalent in the Southwest. It's really prevalent in Georgia. So it just depends on where you go. Who wins out based on the general area that you live in. D-Star in West Central Florida, as far as I can tell, there are 7 D-Star repeaters. 6 are on gateways. 1 is not currently on a gateway. That would be the one that is in Polk County. It's on the Bartow Tower, and once it gets connected to the gateway, it will have a very nice footprint. Hopefully, and it has been used in the disaster use for areas. And D-Star is one of the formats that can be readily used on HF. People use the digital mode all the time, and it's very plausible, again, in disaster communications because of that unit-to-unit capability. Yaesu Fusion is the easiest digital format to use. You don't have to do anything but turn the radio on and put your call sign in there. It's got great voice quality. The wide voice, which is a mode of the digital, is very clear. It takes the full 12.5 instead of splitting it down. Cons, again, it's brand specific. Yaesu is the only person that is manufacturing it. It's limited connectivity locally to networks in the West Central Florida region. There's only 1 or 2 repeaters that I could find in the West Central Florida region that have wires capability. There's a bunch of Yaesu C4FM repeaters out there, but only 2 that I could find that were connected to Wires X. Now, I will tell you that that's where this comes back in, because 99% of these multi-link things will blend C4FM, YSF into DMR, and DMR into YSF more readily than almost any other format. And that, I'll have to disclaim, that may not be all the repeaters that I know. That's just the ones that I could locate, that I've located so far. P25. Now, P25 is P25. This is a P25 radio. They're readily available. This is the radio that is currently used by the Civil Air Patrol as well. So finding one in VHF is extremely difficult, but it will patch into your hotspot into talk groups. It's very active, but again, it is a commercial radio, commercial mode only. There's no ham specific model made for P25 that I'm aware of. And it can be bridged from hotspot to hotspot on configuration fairly easily. And it will bridge from one mode to the other. I may not have all the information out there on the repeaters. There's only 1. There's 7 in the West Central Florida area. None of them are linked that I know of, and none of them are gateway. There are none gatewayed in Lake County, which is not in our region. However, they do use it in their Aries program up there and have for years. There are 3 P25 linked repeaters that are dual mode in the Lake County area. The manufacturers of P25, and this may not be all of them, Motorola, Harris, CF Johnson, Kenwood, Tate, etc. And you just have to look for them. Most of them some of them are still in production, and some of them are going to be used. Again, you have to try to find the available software to program them, which can be difficult. Like I said, the Civil Air Patrol is currently using P25, and they currently use the EF Johnson 5100 as their primary radio, but I understand they're going to be changing their format here soon too. And then NXDN. NXDN, I have an NXDN radio over here. NXDN radio is also manufacturer specific mode. ICOM IDS, Kenwood XDN, NXDN, extremely good voice. Pros, West Central Florida area has a very extensive, well-maintained, linked NXDN network associated with the West Central Florida group, 5 repeaters, actually 7. Take the 2 over on the West Coast that are linked to it. There's a net that is conducted every week on there. And there's one person that is currently on here, if he's still on here, who links into that net, not using an NXDN radio, at least one every week. Kevin, he bridges and comes in via DMR into NextDN, and you cannot tell he's not on a NextDN radio. Again, making the statement, don't tell a ham that it can't be done, because it can. And then again, there's DMR, and that happens to be an Anytone. There's several manufacturers, as I've stated before. Remember I said in the beginning that it's the predominant mode in commercial? Well, in this area, it's the same with ham. Currently, and I may not have them all listed, there are 22 DMR repeaters in operation in the West Central Florida area, 22. All of them having at least one or more talk group, common talk groups, and more on the way. There's some things, good things that are happening with it. And does this mean that DMR has won out? Not at all. It's just a mode that we just happen to have a predominance in this area. Now, I'm sure you had questions at the beginning. Why did I say that this is ham with a different flavor? Because when I first started talking about it, started talking about DMR, digital radio, I lost a group. It's inevitable. I lost a group of people here because they're not interested in DMR, or some say that it's not ham radio. Well, let me explain to you, and please listen to me. What that involves in amateur radio, it involves leadership. And I highlighted their new hams specifically. The other night, I sat in a club meeting. Great presentation. Love to listen to the guy, and he is exactly dead on it. He's talking about what he's doing with HF radio. 9 people had passed their technician test that night sitting in the room. 9. New hams. He's listening to this guy talk about HF radio, HF radio, HF radio, HF radio, which is great. That's why they wanted to get into it. And then he asks or answers the question, how much is in the little system that you've got right there? And he said $6,000. 9 brand new hams just went. My wife's going to kill me if I go home and tell her that I have a $6,000 get into hobby. HF is a wonderful thing. It's the basis of what we do. It's a great opportunity to communicate with people all over the world. But I'm going to tell you something. I talk to a guy about once a week in Maryland who had his legs blown off protecting this country and had his left hand blown off protecting this country. And he's in a nursing home, and the only mode that he can talk all over this country on is DMR. And if anybody tells me he's not a ham radio operator, they're going to get my fur fired up, because he's just as much a ham as anybody else is. And he belongs into this fraternity. So let's go back and look at what I was talking about, ham of a different flavor. Normally when I do this presentation, I pass out suckers. And then at this point, I ask you to take your sucker. How many of you had grape? How many of you ever had a grape Tootsie Roll? Well, that's HF. How many of you had a chocolate one? That's FT8. How many of you ever had a yellow one, a lemon one? Well, that's 2 meter, 440. How many of you have had a butterscotch one, which are my favorite, by the way, butterscotch and caramel? Well, that's digital radio. When you get down to and eat all the flavor off of it, and you get down to the middle, it's a Tootsie Roll. That Tootsie Roll's ham radio. And the importance of that is if we're not congealed as ham radio operators and support what everybody else's flavor is, instead of isolating our flavor or saying that our flavor is better than someone else's, or you're not part of our flavor, then we really do ourselves an injustice. Why? Because will it ever have a place in disaster communications? 100% yes. By looking at what is out there, this came up just the other night in an ARES meeting. I'm not talking about communicating with people all over the world. I'm talking about with boots on the ground. People are going out, send a ham radio operator out with the damage assessment people. Communicate back to the command post. How can you do that? You can do it with using DMR. You can use it with other digital formats, because see, most all of the communications sectors in the Central Florida area and the state of Florida have a various number, but I'll use just one. It's called an EDAC. And that's one of the ones that we have here. We can bridge every mode of radio communications into one through the command post. So why can't we add that digital radio that's out there? It's very simple. There's not one in the command post. Put one in the command post, put it in the EDAC system and bridge it. You can talk, I can talk P25, I can talk to 2 meter, I can talk to aircraft, I can talk to railroad, I can talk to whoever I needed to talk to through that command post. It will have a place in disaster communications for the boots on the ground and outside connectivity, because not all the internet's going to be down. And it is going to be able to connect with people and get anything in this area. This is a mobile repeater. If you've ever seen a mobile communication system deployed, Polk County has one that we can actually put a 7-channel trunking system on the air. We've done it multiple times. We did it in Hancock, Mississippi, and put communications back on the air. And you can put a DMR repeater on that just as easy as you can anything else. And that's basically what I just said. The bridge is there. The bridge for compatibility is there. There are several bridge types to be able to use this stuff. Now, in DMR, what are we currently doing bridging now? There are several bridge talk groups that we're working on, and I've been working with several of the providers that we're currently working on to where we can do this within the West Central Florida region. Polk County has a bridge talk group for all of Polk County and Lake County currently. Now, we're not part of Lake County in the West Central Florida area, but because our repeaters are now linked, if they've got a problem, and let me tell you what, I've got awakened one morning as a battalion chief when a tornado came through South Lake County. So Polk County was there, West Central Florida was there, but we got up in that area. We had some bad communications issue. There are bridge communications now with all the DMR networks on a talk group called the Ridge. We have now also bridged all the Polk County repeaters currently on DMR with the FDAR network over in Hillsborough County with a talk group. So we're starting to bridge these communications networks together in the West Central Florida area to where our brothers and our sisters in ham radio will be able to come to our aid, if nothing else, but through moral support or making phone calls where there are actually phone calls they're able to be made. This group will actually come together, and other DMR operators are inquiring about bridging these talk groups together for disaster purposes. Get asked this question all the time, nothing to do with all that. I'm off my soapbox now, but it's always a funny question. What is the best digital mobile radio antenna or digital base antenna that I can use for my DMR radio? The same one that you're using on 2 meter or 70 centimeter. There's no such thing as a digital antenna. If you buy into that advertising ploy, you just spent money that you didn't need to spend. Our commonality. I'm going to ask you to do a math question. To enter the last 2 digits, if you were born after 2000, you don't belong here because you have to add a 1. But enter the last 2 digits of your birth year. For example, mine's 57. Then add how old you're going to be on your birthday this year, whether you've had it or not. I just turned 64. Every one of you should have came up with the same exact number. You all should have come up with 121. What does that mean? We're all different. But when it gets right down to it, we're all the same. And as part of communications, we're all the same. Depends on what flavor we like. Depends on what our interests are and what generates this mind of geeks. And I don't mind being called a geek, that makes us tick because we solve problems that the rest of the world will eventually benefit from. Look at, we just saw that with the ventilator thing. And it's an amazing, amazing thing. We're all different. And that's all, folks, for those of you old enough to remember what that is. February.
All righty. Thank you very much, Mike. I have checked the box, so you may unmute yourself now and may ask questions. And excellent presentation. Excellent presentation. So this time we'll stand by for, and I think we've answered most of the questions in the chat, but if we have not, raise your hand here, and hopefully I can see it here, and you may go ahead and speak and ask your question. Trying to see if anybody's got their hands raised here or not. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Jeremy, go ahead and ask your question, and you may unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wrote it in the, hi guys, and thank you for the presentation. I really liked it. You mentioned passcode required if the repeater's on a Brandmeister. I got into DMR like 2 years ago, and then I sort of put it away because I don't think there's any RF coverage where I live. So A, how do I get a passcode if I already have an ID? And B, how can you tell if a repeater's on Brandmeister? And anything else you can include that would clarify this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. A couple of things there. You need to go to the Brandmeister website and go to self-care, and the block right underneath your DMR ID will say passcode. Now I'm going to give you a whole lot of advice. It'll save you a whole lot of time. Do not make it complicated. Don't put special characters because apparently it messes up the Brandmeister server when you do that. Make it simple, but do not make it super, super long. Just something simple for that passcode.
Is there like a minimum number of digits or whatever?
It's a minimum of 5.
Oh, okay.
Mike.
And
yes.
so you got to do this. I guess I'm getting at, like, how do I know I have to do this? How do I know a repeater's on Brandmeister?
Well, if a repeater, the other thing that I was going to tell you about Brandmeister and all the networks, if you're trying to locate your repeater and what the digital modes are, and it's a great organization, I'm not knocking their organization. Repeater Book sometimes has older information on DMR that doesn't follow. The operators don't update this stuff as often as they should. And we actually should have another clearinghouse that would give you better information. DMR, by the way, is the only group that doesn't have a national group. D-Star, the D-Rats, and the Fusion group, they all have their own organizations that they maintain their information. We really should have that in DMR. But if you'll Google the area that you're in and put amateur radio digital formats or DMR, it'll come up and it'll give you that information as to whether it's a Seabridge or whether it's a Brandmeister. There's only a few that are Brandmeister in the area. Most of them are Seabridge.
Oh, so I wouldn't really need this
unless you're using a hotspot
passcode thing. Okay.
Right.
And then on the talk groups, Yeah, there's like thousands of them. So like, what's a beginner supposed to do for a talk group?
Well, your state talk groups are your basic best bet. The local talk group, state route 3112 for Florida, 3113 for Georgia, which is very active, and then the local talk groups that are popular. But 3100 is the talk group that you can kind of get into the national stuff on most of them.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike,
Yes, sir.
can you post in the chat the link I posted the one for radioid.net. You might want to post the link to Brandmeister and in the text there, which we're going to save the chat and I'll post it to the section website later as well. So folks can go back and look at it once it's done. I can just upload it as a text file. So if you can post that chat, that link to Brandmeister, folks may want to have that. And also a question was asked that I will post now. Let me turn my video on. I had it off while I was working here. There we go. We do have as a goal here in the section on our section website to do a list of DMR repeaters, talk groups, and so forth. So I know I've probably asked for your and Mike's help on that. Being you two guys are, you're really into DMR and so forth. So I'm going to be asking for y'all's help on that, and also on the fusion modes, a list of voice repeaters. For those that want to go more traditional, or NXDN or whatever. We'd like to have a list of all that. So that is a project, Jeremy, to answer the question you put on the chat. It is a future goal that we do have in mind for the section website, but I got to fix the plugin. On December 20th, WordPress did an update. It blew our forms deal out of the saddle. They're still usable, but you can't update them. You can't change them. So I'm going to go to an entirely new plugin and redo all the forms. And then it blew our calendar plugin to bits as well. That's not updating anymore. So it caught me when I didn't realize it till I had the time I had to go back to work. So there you are. So, but that is coming, but it is a project for this year.
All right, sir. I'll provide you that information.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. I'm just trying to see if anybody else had anything here. Again, this is all new for me. I'm still learning, but hey, that's what ham radio is all about. And yes, Mike, you're absolutely right. Now, DMR is just ham radio that's different. It's not any less or any more. It's different. And so it fills a need and is a tool in the toolbox and fills a need. Like that fellow that you said was in a nursing home. That was the only way he could talk to anybody. And it fulfilled a need. All right. Okay, and you're welcome, Jeremy. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? If not, we'll go and end the YouTube stream. So this will be a separate, by the way, of all these presentations as we do them. I'm ending each presentation on YouTube, so it's one file per presentation, so it's not quite so terribly long. I learned this from the ARRL Tapper DCC. They just did it as one whole recording for the day, but that's 9 hours. And if you want to download it and watch it offline, you better have some good bandwidth because it's going to take you a while to download. It's going to be quite large, but that way it's a little more manageable. And you can, with the right plugins on YouTube and your browser, you can actually download it and watch it offline later. And again, the chat feature, I will save that to my computer. And we will put that on the TECHCON page following the conference. So you'll have that information for any links you might have missed. Also, the presentations are available there as well. So you can go to the TECHCON page. The link is in the chat. I posted it to the chat. You can go right to the TECHCON page. Each presentation, it shows what format it is, so you know what it is you're downloading. But they're all there. So, and we will have a proceedings after the conference. Will be one document. Jim Westliger, K3WR, our assistant section manager for publications, will be doing that for us. So we try to make this a good experience for everyone, to make it full and complete. So you have information to go, as I say, go have your own geek moments and contribute some to the hobby. And by the way, folks, we're looking for articles for the Experimenter. I'm hoping to do the next issue of the Experimenter here, our quarterly newsletter here shortly. So if you have an article, if you've written something up, send it in to me. And I'll post my email address here in the chat here in just a minute. And we will post also some of these as articles in the Experimenter, some of these PDFs that presentations we have done. And does anybody have any questions for Mike? And then we'll end the YouTube stream if not.